I'd like to start our evening by reading a fragment of a poem by Karla Kelsey from the first book I ever read of hers, Knowledge Forms the Aviary. The fragment appears in a long-form poem, Sound and Image, Accordance 1. Petals scatter as our words continue into the space behind the high wall in the dream where perhaps we live twinned, hovering over our own bodies as we wake and move from room to room, following the path of the sun. Charted outward, are we beholden to love the world our words made? The Writers Institute has been inspiring writers for over 30 years, and in honor of this history, I spent some time this morning in the basement of the Blau-Weiss Library. Our archives are mind-blowing. I advise you all to go meet Meg Garnett, our university archivist, if you haven't yet had the chance. Now, to link this, in advance of the national holiday being celebrated next week, I'm feeling very thankful to each of you for the role you play in fostering this community. Thank you, Matt Null, for organizing the Seavey reading series. And thank you to our program coordinator, Tony Zitta, and our literary arts interns, Greg, Brooke, Jen, and Arabella, for writing press releases and creating posters and distributing bookmarks, which will all eventually end up in the archive in the library. Also, thanks to Tara Mackey in the bookstore for the books that we have up here, and to the people of IT and events management who helped us set things up for tonight. Thank you finally to the generations of people who inhabited this land long before it became a university. And then thank you, university ancestors, generations of scholars and academic leaders who dedicated lives to making this place so hospitable to learning, creativity, and thought. Switching gears, last month we awarded a copy of Sarah Cipher's groundbreaking novel to Colton Cook, a senior creative writing major. If you have Instagram, and if you have your phone with you, check out the Writers Institute Instagram account. There's always something new to discover, and if you take a picture of this event tonight and DM it to us, one photo will receive a wonderful prize, which is a signed copy of a book called Transcendental Factory from Mina Loy. So please do that. And now please silence your phone for the reading. If we have time at the end, our author will be happy to answer questions up until around 8 p.m., at which point I'll wave to her, and then she will sit at the table and sign books for you. I'm honored to introduce you now to Senior Emmy Harris, the Managing Editorial Intern for Penguin Random House Publisher Services for Kodansha, which is Japan's #1 manga publisher. Emmy's prestigious internship started in September, ends this week, and picks back up in January with Penguin Random House's ebook department. In this position, Emmy works with files and keeps track of schedules and spreadsheets, and meets online daily with very cool people. She's learned how to work with foreign licensors, for example in Japan, how to communicate across a team, and how to navigate new databases. Emmy discovered SU because of our publishing and editing program, which is what she knew she always wanted to do. And she added her creative writing major in her second semester of freshman year. She's an amazing writer. She's published her fiction and poetry in Rivercraft, creative nonfiction in Essay, and poems in Sanctuary. She's been the secretary for Fuse for 2 years, the treasurer of the Writers Institute Club for 2 years, the secretary for SU Slam, a TA in the Publishing and Editing Summer Program, an editorial assistant for MLS, and next semester she will be a TA for SU Press. Emmy's career goal is to be part of a managing editorial team, and my goal is to be able to read one of Emmy's unpublished books of poetry, essay, or fiction one day. I'm so proud to turn this evening over to Emmy Harris.
Karla Kelsey is the author of the poetic novel Transcendental Factory for Mina Loy, which was born from her experience working on Lost Writings, 2 novels by Mina Loy. Her extraordinary capabilities as a writer and an editor are exemplified in these 2 books as careful, heartfelt explorations of lost and the inherent intimacy of editing another person's writing. Karla Kelsey has written 7 books, including the poetry collections Uncertainty, published in 2023, and Blood Feather, published in 2020. Her book of experimental essays, Upsphere, was selected for the 2016 Essay Press Prize. Her writing has also appeared in various journals such as Bomb, Fence, Conjunctions, New American Writing, the Boston Review, Verse, and Tupelo Quarterly. She holds a PhD in literary arts from the University of Denver, an MFA in poetry from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and a BA in literature and philosophy from UCLA. A recipient of awards and fellowships from the Poetry Society of America, the Fulbright Scholars Program, and Yale University, she is also an accomplished editor who has contributed to projects such as the anthology Matters of Feminist Practice by Belladonna Collaborative, Fence Magazine's Poetry Review, Constant Critic, and of course, Lost Writings, 2 novels by Mina Loy. In the afterword of Lost Writings, Dr. Kelsey highlights a note Mina Loy wrote on the front of one of her manuscripts, which says, quote, "Twice everything has already taken place, that our personality or destiny is like a roll of negative film, already printed but unrevealable until it has found a camera to project it, and a surface to throw it upon." By stitching together Mina Loy's incomplete autobiographical novels and publishing them for the first time ever, Dr. Kelsey has become that projector for Mina Loy. She has given her unconventional, iconoclastic work the freedom it craves, introducing it to a world that needs Mina Loy's witty, philosophical, unapologetically feminist voice. Karla Kelsey's own novel, Transcendental Factory, is a collage of fact and fiction, a kaleidoscope of research and poetry, part love letter and part lyric documentary. Its photographs and films and conversations with strangers, an archive of art as it is created, as it exists, and as it is lost. This Transcendental Factory takes pieces of the past and reforms them into a future through mesmerizing, uncategorizable prose. Karla Kelsey is the reason why I am a creative writing major at Susquehanna University. The first time I met her was halfway through my first semester here, when I came to her as a young, painfully terrified writer, believing in the myth of not being good enough. And I asked her, what do I do? What is workshop like? How do I not get mauled by the wolves of critique? And she told me, it's not about being good enough. It's about a community of people who just want to help you grow. So I listened to her advice and made one of the best decisions of my life. Everything about Dr. Kelsey inspires me. From the way she commands a classroom to the very air she breathes, I know she was born with poetry in her bloodstream. There's even a theory among my fellow students that Dr. Kelsey is secretly a fairy. But I know she is human in the way that she finds humanity in everything. She is so deeply connected to the world we live in, so in tune with how we understand ourselves and each other, that she couldn't be anything other than a fantastically intelligent, beautifully creative human being. Please welcome to the stage, Karla Kelsey.
For coming tonight. This is probably obviously a pure pleasure for me and hopefully for Mina Loy in the ether. Special thanks to Lawrence Roth and Betsy Verhoeven, Tony Zitta and Dave Ramsaran for support at Susquehanna while I was working on this project. Very appreciated. Thank you to G.C. Waldrop for friendship, poetry, and definite support while I was working on this project. The PR from the Literary Arts interns is just beautiful. And Catherine, you really embody the spirit of creative community that Mina Loy also embodies, so thank you so much. And to all of you, students and colleagues, It's such an honor to work with you here. So I first met Mina Loy, as most do, in anthologies of poetry featuring modernist writers. But I quickly learned that while she's known for the radical free verse she wrote in the 1910s and 20s, there's even a pig cupid rooting erotic garbage. She was exuberantly creative beyond this. She wrote novels, stories, plays, and genre-bending philosophy while painting, creating assemblages out of trash, and designing lamps for her Paris boutique. Though she was at the center of several modernist circles, her friends and fans included Juna Barnes, the sculptor Constantine Brancusi, the visual artist Marcel Duchamp, Ezra Pound, Gertrude Stein, and Joseph Cornell. Nearly all of her visual art has been lost, and much of her writing has only been published posthumously or remains in manuscript. Born in a London suburb in 1882, Mina Loy succeeded in building a creative life in the face of an oppressive Victorian upbringing, the meager education befitting a woman of her time, divorce when this could ruin a woman, the loss of her beloved second husband, the death of 2 of her children, and the raising of 2 others. She sustained herself through 2 world wars, a global pandemic, a worldwide economic depression, continual personal economic precarity, and immigration as part of the wave of refugees fleeing Europe in the 1930s. Her life after coming to the United States wasn't easy. In the 1940s and 50s, when she was in her late 60s and 70s, she lived in New York on painfully little money and moved over half a dozen times, including renting rooms on Skid Row on the Bowery. She nevertheless continued writing and making visual artwork until the early 1960s. She died in Aspen, Colorado in 1966. That is to say, Mina Loy persisted, created, and thrived within the wreckage of the 20th century, ongoing today. The 2 books I'll share with you tonight are love letters to Mina Loy, to you who sustain a life in creativity. Lost Writings, which I edited out of Loy's archive in the Beinecke Library for Manuscripts and Rare Books, features 2 never-before-published autobiographical novels. And released just yesterday, Transcendental Factory for Mina Loy is my own experimental biography, poet's novel, work of literary criticism that creates a resonating space for the lost and the undocumented. Lost Writings. Among the work that was unknown during Loy's lifetime is what she referred to as her book or her novel. 7 manuscripts of fugitive prose that draw on childhood, student days, and her artistic literary life. The novels in my edited volume, one titled The Child and the Parent and the other Islands in the Air, are part of this autobiographical cycle. Interlinked text written over a span of 20 years, from the mid-1920s to mid-1940s, these fascinating works narrate the struggle of the creative spirit as it comes into consciousness. Both begin with Loy's childhood in Victorian London before branching off into separate yet interrelated stories. The genre-bending Child and the Parent offers lyric, associative, philosophical critique of the toxicity of gender norms to the free creative spirit. Islands in the Air moves into the territory of autofiction, narrating the journey of Linda, Loy's alter ego, as she strives to become an artist and an independent woman. Timeless and timely, like Virginia Woolf's contemporaneous A Room of One's Own, Loy's texts understand the individual to be inextricable from social context and the female writer-artist to be inextricable from her social fabric. I'll give you a taste of these unconventional works of prose, about 5 minutes from each, before turning to my creative response, Transcendental Factory. So The Child and the Parent. Part 1 of the book, titled The Child, describes the process in which the free creative spirit comes into a body at birth and undergoes childhood, which forms the self into a person. In part 2, The Parent, Loy turns to look at the Victorian social context that created the personalities of the previous generation and the patterns her own generation must struggle against. The Child and the Parent was probably written in the late 1920s when Loy was living in Paris. I'll read a few pages from The Parent from a chapter titled Ladies in an Aviary. These ladies are from Loy's mother's generation, but their condition and Loy's critique is resonant today. Perhaps the most dramatic difference you'll hear is that sugar was apparently bought and sold in loaves rather than granulated, and ladies wore corsets instead of sheepwear. So this is from Ladies in an Aviary by Mina Loy. They are so lovely and they cannot get out. Their breasts are pouting as they trail their lacy bustles among the azaleas. Dispelling the shadows of their lashes in a starry veneration, they lift that flat look of the naive to the visitor, a man with a loaf of sugar. It is so sweet, this sugar, the sugar of fictitious values. What would you like us to be, they inquire in a flutter of modest aspiration, while the solitaires on their fingers shift up and down the wires that close them in. Angels, their visitor replies, holding the sugar higher, and a flock of satin draperies settle on poofs, as if on clouds, waiting with wings sedately folded for a diamond star to rise in a massive fringe. Here is love, cries the great strong man, 'tis woman's whole existence. This loaf of sugar more glistening than the gas that burns in groups of frosted globes, with a light as forgotten to us as the hourglass figures it throws into relief. There is a tremor of ribbon, a hasty sweep of feathers, as inquisitive ladies, running to eat out of his hand, agitate these tassels of the soul in their impatience to be satisfied. And it is very wistfully that they recompose their ruffles on retiring from the scene to gnaw a pocket handkerchief or fall into a faint. An even sweeter offering to the captives is the sanctity of marriage. And although it seems to evaporate as they taste of it, they do not demur, for marriage is something the neighbors suppose, while the married, shut in with their sanctity, hunt for marriage all over the home. The wires of the aviary resonate with a buzz of slender sighs. Why are these ladies kept in captivity with their bodies almost severed in the middle? They appear to be tame. It is the fashion. In the perspective that diminishes a period of time to a grimace of fashion, society of the 80s appeared to live in a gilded cage. The female pets could never escape, but the men enjoyed a certain amount of liberty. A transcendental observer might be able to explain why their morals and their feathers followed an identical curve. Their early steam engines and their intellects had each that particular degree of velocity. Why their sermons were bombastic as their bric-a-brac, their pompous grass as fussy as their emotions, their stomachs the shape of their souls. Why the back of a prayer book had the very accent that was being threshed out in their musical operettas. Whether these formations on their idiosyncrasies make shapes that assume a significance from his point of vantage and fall into place as part of some august structure. The structure we can see is quite amusing, being overcarved, overdraped, and overstuffed, for the cage is lined with the fussy surplus of man's conquests of nature. Those minor inventions he multiplies to celebrate the passivity of one who, so much of an angel and rather like a cow, is after all the sole suavity of his civilization, until woman, showered with accessories whose folly accentuates their charm, comes to look as if reclining among plumes that she herself had shed. The second novel, Islands in the Air, probably written in the 1940s, repeats passages from the first novel's beginning, but then Loy develops the story into a narrative of her alter ego, Linda, and follows her through childhood, teenage years, and into art school. Needless to say, Linda doesn't get along with her Victorian-era mother. Here's a passage from later in the novel, the night before Linda begins art school at age 15. So here's something from Islands in the Air. All the while I had been growing up, becoming a woman. Someday you'll be a mother yourself, then you'll understand, says mine, pushing me violently in the chest. This nervous body is developing, and for thrift she is making me a dress from a pattern with a child's flat yoke. How can I fit you, you nasty girl? Do you think at your age it is decent to have a figure? Your vile flesh, you'll get no good out of it. Curse you, curse your father, I'm going to crush it, she screams. Nice mom. Having seen little except for machine-made furniture, the subjects I found appropriate to art were cupids, peacocks, cypresses, and swans. Ah, swan's down, swan's neck, condescension in curves against sunsets of jam. To what most sweetly could I make flesh compare? Fondants. How idealized foliage, as emeralds, and eyes to be fully orbed? Would not sockets or lids detract from their astral entirety? I imagined creation to be an intensification. Uncultured pilgrims to the shrine of an aesthetic leap at the superlative only to slow down to analysis on reaching a senility of ardor. The night before I entered the art school, I could not sleep. Visual excitement hung on the dark pictures I longed to paint as soon as the professor showed me how. A pair. The one in the treble portrayed a cupid having no joints whatever, his fondant face flat as his brassy curls. Added to his grace was a swan with nothing under its feathers, of a whiteness on which the slightest shadow would be a pollution. The one in the base portrayed a bronze cupid, his curls and eyes of ebony. He leaned against the outspread fan of a peacock glowing with unsullied color straight from the tube. As I lie there planning the response of the multitude to my lovely boys, my brain suddenly aware of being led along by an intention, dropped that intention as it was trained to do. The effect upon me was of an abstract blow. In a flash of darkness, the mental scene clouding filled with a sense of shame. I automatically reproached myself for my presumption. Expecting the study of art to be a participation in something familiarly resembling the transformation scene in a pantomime, I was ushered into the antique room through a leather-padded door, whose swing back sounded at once a groan and hush. A place was assigned to me among a line of students along the wall, rows of minors in the galleries of ignorance. Scritch go their charcoal sticks, and the black blastings of their emery blocks strew their voluminous gray pinafores, leave chimney-sweep smudges on their anemic features as they push the English wisp of hair out of their plodding eyes. In Italy, 3 centuries ago and yesterday, to displace a block of enormous marble doubly blanched with alabaster dusts, the haltered oxen with their hooves of slaves' labor, the white road from Carrara. Hanging from air inserted in it, David's nose emits a plaster clink as I set it straight. I am ordered to reproduce it exactly. The rounding out of the wing of his nostrils was effected by rubbing a hard Conte crayon on the sandpaper until it was pointed as a pin. You came to a pour on the Walkman paper. You jabbed your Conte into it, leaving there, like a fly, your minute speck. The speck is too black. You pounce upon it with a sharpened eraser. It pales. After several weeks of persistence, the area thus covered may be smoothed to perfection with spikes of coiled blotting paper called stumps and twiddled bread. You are stippling it up among the dry and dirty crumbs fallen into the rack of the easel in which lay the hallucinatory white feather of my vanished swan. Linda doesn't think too much of the art school tradition of learning by copying, or of following the aesthetic values of her time. And her creator, remember, ends up making artwork out of trash. But don't worry, Linda continues to find a way to be an artist and writer, as does Loy. Transcendental Factory, my book, which I'll turn to now, is devoted to this persistence, this pursuit. I began writing it alongside my work in Loy's archive. For each chapter, I select a year in Loy's life, focusing on her creative output and the context of her time. Here, I'll give you an excerpt from 1931. I'll read 15-20 minutes that will conclude this presentation, although, of course, I'm also happy to answer questions. And I'll begin with the epigraph of the book. Perhaps in that transcendental factory in which the word is made flesh, there is no inertia. And that's Mina Loy from Islands in the Air. 1931, Paris. Mina steps with the quietude of Paris, 1931, before dawn to walk 10 minutes home down Rue de Cherche-Midi from Constantine Brancusi's Impasse Rome-Sin atelier, commanding the self to unruffle the mind and listen to the sparrows, to what Day says prior to delivery trucks and cafes setting out tables. Constantine just now, in Mina's absence, scooping tea leaves from his kettle, polish of metal, jagged, rough marble. Constantine, Mina said upon leaving, we must never forget your name means steadfast and was shared with 11 Roman and Byzantine emperors, several Bulgarian emperors, and 2 Greek kings. Constantine, who smells of stone, horse, rotted plum. They talked all night, how to keep the body loose within tightening economy, architecture within architecture within architecture. Brancusi, since 1910, has created new works, not as individual pieces, but as components in mobile groups clustered throughout his studio. He often explains this as if forgetting for nearly a decade, Mina has regularly frequented his atelier, has many times sat just so on a chair between a marble block and the stove. She's turned her face to the heat. Oval, sphere, angle, cube, forms completion disrupted by notch, furrow, cleft, a layer of space, a circumference that properly belongs to the body, though invisible to the eye. How else drive a car, ride a horse? A leaf placed on a piece of film set on an electromagnetic plate reveals that the plant's aura spikes electric violet. Extension, network, constellation, fourth dimension. If the event is Mina, then surrounded by the event is the invisible fact that Mina means with gilded helmet, white silk dress, perfume of roses, means also of the sea, also will, desire, protection, and in Persian, azure, blued glass gem, enamel, in Coptic Egyptian, like Constantine, steadfast. Also, around each body, entity, name, a circumference of time. Brancusi's head of a girl cast in bronze shared the 1906 Salon d'Automne with Loy's 5 watercolored women in pastel flounces and shawls surrounding a fainting nude figure with delicate wings. It is easy to miss Eros's genitalia, so finely drawn, but once noticed, the expressions on the women's faces shift from sisterly interest to irreverence and delight, except for the woman in pink who sits facing the viewer, her back to the scene. She's slightly bored as she leans on an enormous blue medallion intaglioed with peacocks and vines. The closeness of roses. Mina breathes them in as she makes her way down the boulevard in her rose mask. To hold in the mouth the halo of space surrounding each syllable, because the body and the life and the body are part of the gall gates of the house, the roof beams, the walking sticks, the dispats, the spoons. Breathing in on the contraction to a count of 4, exhaling for a count of 6 on the release. Repeat, even while walking across the cafe, across the square, across the stage in the dark. Repeat this moving through water. These gestures comfort a process that speeds up until they go unnoticed, but slow them down, film on a reel, they become offerings. The horse in mid-gallop floats all his legs in the air. In 1931, drought overtakes the Midwestern plains of the US, and dust from overworked land billows into storms. Scientists at Columbia University demonstrate the existence of heavy water, an essential step in transforming common uranium into the plutonium that will fuel nuclear bombs. In 1931, Laszlo Brio first exhibits his ballpoint pen in Budapest. Nylon is invented. The Empire State Building is completed and opens as the tallest building in the world. Charlie Chaplin's City Lights premieres. Dracula starring Bela Lugosi premieres. Frankenstein starring Boris Karloff premieres. In 1931, Boris Yeltsin, James Dean, Rupert Murdoch, and Desmond Tutu are born. U.S. unemployment reaches 8 million. In 1931, the Black American teenagers, Willie Roberson, Olin Montgomery, Ozzie Powell, Eugene Williams, Roy Wright, Clarence Norris, Andy Wright, Charlie Weems, and Haywood Patterson are wrongly accused of raping 2 white women aboard a Southern Railroad freight train in northern Alabama. All but the 13-year-old Roy Wright, a minor, are sentenced to death. Virginia Woolf's The Waves, Pearl S. Buck's The Good Earth, and John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath are published. Bunker's wood rat goes extinct. In 1931, 7 to 9 million people visit the Colonial Exposition in Paris. In 1931, on May 4th, speaking in private to Nazi Party members, Hitler says, "We can achieve something only by fanaticism." In 1931, Al Capone is indicted for tax evasion. A British committee awards sole ownership of the Wailing Wall to Muslims, and Amelia Earhart crashes in Abilene, Kansas, exiting the fiery remains of the plane unscathed. A gramophone sings, an airplane roars. For the 1931 Paris Colonial Exposition, open since May, the French milliner Agnes has designed an Algerian hat with a fetching native side point. Woven of strips of brown wool to show hair at one side in the smart new manner. This hat is worn by none other than that icon of style, Baba. Since prior to the exhibit's opening, Knox in New York has had this hat. New York possesses the hat, sells the hat. Paris replicates the colonies. Within 15 minutes of the Palais Garnier, visitors are transplanted to the Bois de Vincennes, exhibition grounds populated by the jungles of Africa, palaces of Angkor, entire villages of Congo huts, Chinese temples, and, as if in collusion with Knox in New York, the buildings of Mount Vernon, manufactured by Sears, Roebuck and Company. The exhibition doesn't include the property's 8,000 acres divided into 5 farms, which had been worked by over 500 enslaved people at any given time. The Guyanese exhibit offers instead butterflies of blue enamel, fine hammocks. The pavilions have been created for Baba, entering through the Porte d'Honneur in a smart tweed suit. Baba in baby blue with navy bows at the neck, shoulders, hips, and wrists, posing with an enormous plume of cotton candy before the oval lawn parterre. Baba, languid in silver Viennese bias-cut silk against the center obelisk. Baba with a necklace featuring an enormous zircon cross, pausing before the performance of cascades and jets colored by electric lights in the theater of water. In 1931, supermarket, nuclear physics, and military-industrial complex enter the lexicon. Once an ancient forest home to boar, deer, orlaton, Bacchus, Diana, Sylvanus. Then the hunting ground of royals. Then military training grounds. Then public park. Then prison grounds, housing Denis Diderot and the Marquis de Sade. Mata Hari during the First World War, prior to her execution in the Bois de Vincennes, blows a kiss to the firing squad. On the opposite side of the exhibition's theater of water stands Loy's son Giles, back from the dead. Stolen from Florence when he was 12 by Loy's husband, Boyce, who, while Loy was in New York, had taken Giles to live with him in the Caribbean. Giles died unexpectedly 2 years later in 1923. Yet here he is, grown into his safari jacket and pith helmet. By the time the waters stop, he's vanished. If you see Mina, Boyce had written, tell her that he lived finely and died bravely, making much of the fact that Loy had left Giles's letters unanswered. If her silence and not a rare cancer hadn't killed him, it had at least amplified, Boyce wrote, Giles's suffering. Had Loy really left her son's letters unanswered? Had she? And why? At the exposition, a critic writes, we constitute the marvelous stairway of Angkor Wat and make the sacred dancers twirl. But in Indochina, we shoot, we deport, we imprison. On the fringes of the Bois where itinerants pitch their tents, Mina joins a stranger at his campfire. Staring into flames, she states Giles's death was the most difficult thing, and then repeats the most difficult thing with gestures. She puts her hands in the fire, and I put my hands in the fire, fire traveling up my sleeves, down my dress, the stench of burnt cotton, burnt hair, burnt skin. A radio broadcast cuts out after reporting that Britain has just released Mahatma Gandhi from prison, where he'd been held for walking 24 days to the Arabian Sea to lead an illegal harvest of salt from its water in protest of the British salt tax. When the broadcast cuts back in, a reporter announces that between March 2020 and November 2021, the collective wealth of the world's richest increased by $1.3 billion a day. Dresses made from the loveliest iridescent fabric lift all at once into flame. I go to the library always alone. Alone with soft lights, creating the halo of space in which I sit, documented by security cameras, and therefore inhabiting the quintessential position of the 21st century. Alone, but never alone. Loy in an unadorned peasant dress, pearls and chandelier earrings, hair parted in the middle and pulled softly back, sits in the center with Berenice Abbott, Brancusi and Tristan Zara to their right, Jane Heap and Margaret Anderson to their left. Empty wine glasses in the foreground, the group casts shadows across the crumbling walls of Brancusi's studio in this file folder's copy of a 1923 photograph. An orb of light nestles in Loy's lap, just where his sleeping muse might have been. The next folder's manuscript, nearly 100 years old, disintegrates along the edges. Where will Loy be found when she leaves her paper form? Typescripts, handwritten drafts, doodles, drawings, patent designs unfold across whatever is at hand. Address books, cablegrams, tracing paper, notebooks, typewriter paper, invoice slips. Letterhead from the Paris lamp shop, partly funded by Peggy Guggenheim, opened in 1926 and sold in 1930. The shop's address is printed in peacock blue. The lamps had been a success, but overwhelming, especially after Julian Levy came calling. Tobacco, vetiver, and something indistinguishable but quite sharp. Young Julian admiring Loy, flirting with her daughter Joella, then marrying Joella 6 months later. They depart for New York in 1928. 9-year-old daughter Fabi tending her menagerie. Mina Loy, Rue de Colisée, Paris. Who would answer if I dialed the shop's number? Digitized, does Loy live in the space between paper and screen? She made her lampshades from fragile material, cellophane, paper, the new malleable plastics. Loy's brittle pages are preserved by clear polyester protective sleeves, a material perhaps not unlike Verivoile, the delicate plastic, glass fabric Loy invented for the detailed work of her sculptural floral lamps, their finely lined leaves. Arum lily, trumpet lily, lamp shop stationery torn at the corner. Loy worries her designs are being stolen, and I am so close to knowing the light or heavy fabric of her dress, and in the living room balancing a typewriter on her knees, fountain pen, ballpoint pen, brio, pencil, red crayon, incomplete. Thank you. Mina Loy trivia? Yes.
How did you find these works? And was it like, what was the process like? Was it difficult, easy, translation?
Yeah, well, I had known her in probably undergraduate, and then in graduate school, my mentor photocopied for me one of her longest poems. It's called Anglo-Mongrels and the Rose. It's probably 30 or 40 pages and out of print. It gave me this photocopy, which I carried. I should have brought it. I still have it, like actually around the world. And I heard that there were some prose works in her archive. A novel called Insel, I-N-S-E-L, not Incel, but means island in German, correct? Yes. One of those 7 autobiographical novels had been published in the 90s. A poet named Elizabeth Arnold, who's an incredible poet, went in the archive and got that one published. And then the stories and essays were published. But I heard there were more books. And I love poets' prose so much. So I had the chance to go to the Beinecke Library, which was that gorgeous white marble building, and read her papers for an afternoon, and I just fell entirely in love. And the two manuscripts, these are probably the most complete of the rest of the 7 that we know of. So some of them might be in some dusty box somewhere, but probably that's it. And The Child and the Parent, there's 2 copies of a very well-formed typescript that Loy typed and has some hand corrections. Neither copy's complete, but if you put them together, it makes a full book. And then with the Islands in the Air, there are 3 incomplete copies that if you put them together, it makes a full book. So when I was there during that afternoon, I realized to really read these books, I would have to transcribe them, because also they were archived by chapters, and you get this wonderful file box with manila folders, and the chapters are each in a folder. And you can't take out more than one folder at a time, which is best practices, right? But when you're sitting there are actually security cameras, which there should be. So you can't shuffle pages. So I was like, okay, to really read these things, I have to transcribe them. And so I was lucky enough to get a fellowship to go back there and do that. And I didn't know if I would ever be able to get them published, and I sort of also didn't know if they were publishable. But they're wonderful, and one thing led to another, and a lot of luck ensued, and I was able to publish them. One of the editors at Yale University Press was interested in Mina Loy stuff, and I had been working on it. Her interest came out of the fact that there was an art exhibition of what is known of Mina Loy's artwork. So the artwork that you saw here was all by her, except that slender sculpture at the beginning was by Brancusi. So there are still some remaining works and also reproductions. So there was an exhibition at Bowdoin College in Maine in early 2023 that traveled to Chicago. So people were interested in Mina Loy. So that was nice because it can be difficult to get interest for the dead, but she was interesting in the moment. So it was difficult. I had that typescript going, and this was in spring of 2020, and so something called the pandemic, which you all remember, happened, and I was in the Beinecke, and people started leaving, and Glenn and Peterson came and visited, and it was right at the beginning, and they were like, this is gonna be bad. They took me to the little store to buy, rubbing alcohol and so forth, and in my head, I'm like, yeah, right, you guys are always so over-prepared. This is really, this is gonna be a weekend, and then the next week the library was closed, and we know it was horrible, and people lost their lives, and yeah, so you were right. Thanks for being right, yeah. But luckily, the collection is so small that it's all scanned online. So this is, okay, Catherine, you really do have to cut me off at 8. I was going to read this little part, but I didn't. So it's interesting, the Beinecke has many of the modernist archives of papers. And so Mina Loy's papers are, let's see. So her papers are housed in 8 boxes, and they categorize these by how many linear feet that takes up in the archive. So hers are 4.25 linear feet. But get this, Gertrude Stein and the Alice B. Toklas papers are 93 linear feet and 173 boxes. But that's not it, because there's also the Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas collection, which is 45 more boxes. So Gertrude Stein has 93 boxes and then 45 boxes. Ezra Pound has 300 boxes, and Langston Hughes has 673 boxes. So Mina Loy's little 8 boxes, it was easy enough for them to scan the papers. So this is great. Go to Yale University Beinecke Library, just Google it, Mina Loy, and you can read all of the scans and also see some of the works on papers, like the alphabet. If you remember that slide, she, in the 40s, to try to make money, she invented all of these really, really cool games and household items. She made a bracelet that also has blotting paper on it, so you could write and then just blot. She made isn't it great? She made a window washer so that you could wash the outside of the windows from the inside. She made a baby doll that when you turned it over, I think it would cry. It was like the Tiny Tears doll that was made maybe 10, 20 years later. So she was unsuccessful in placing any of these inventions, but they have some of them, her drawings of them, her letters to like FAO Schwartz, trying to sell these inventions. So that made my work a little bit easier, a lot easier during the pandemic. I just like kept working on the manuscripts. But it was a fun process. It's an interesting way to know someone. And I'll just say one more small thing about it. So sometimes there would be 2 pages from the typescript, but she would have different hand corrections on each page. So I had to figure out which hand correction to incorporate and which ones to leave behind. So I tried not to change a lot. Her spelling is very creative. She was fluent in English, French, Italian. She knew a smattering of Spanish. She lived in Mexico and some other languages. And so often if a word looked wrong, sometimes she spelled it wrong, but other times I would look at the root of the word and it would just be so perfect. And she would spell, I'm trying to think of the word. There's a homophone in English and French that she would spell that was just so brilliant. So I also learned not to underestimate her, to be like, oh, that's spelled wrong. And then I would see, no, actually the spelling is really important and creative. Is there another question? Yeah.
Hello. I kind of found it interesting that you said that she speaks like different languages and incorporated that into her work. Did you necessarily understand like some of the languages, or did you have to like research the words a lot? Because I heard you say atelier, which is workshop in English, but that's a French word. So I was wondering like how much research did you do in like the translation and like the language aspect of that?
Yeah, I would always look up her words that I didn't know to see, is this in another language? Is it an archaic spelling? She went to school through age 15, as many girls of her time did who were of the upper middle class. And then she went to a couple of not very good art schools. But beyond that, she had no formal education, but read really voraciously. So she has a really incredible vocabulary and a real sense of older words. So yeah, I quickly learned to look her words up instead of just being like, that doesn't make sense or that's wrong, because she was usually right or just being wildly creative with it. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking about the novels in progress. Did she make any attempt to publish those?
Yeah, she did. So she was writing a novel almost her entire writing life. So in 1914, she published her first piece, which was a manifesto, and then she published poetry. In the 40s and 50s, she starts trying to get her book published. She called it her book. Sometimes she titled it Islands in the Air, sometimes she titled it other things. She sent it to New Directions and they declined. There's some correspondence in the New Directions archive at Harvard. But they did send it, he sent it on to Simon & Schuster, and an editor there said that it seemed very interesting, but it was far too large and would need to be edited. But none of those drafts that were actually sent by her, and then her daughter Joella also tried to help get it published, none of those drafts can be found. So the ones at the Beinecke seem more like working drafts because they have hand corrections that you wouldn't send out for submission. Yeah, so she tried. It's hard to say what that book exactly looked like. Did it include all 7 autobiographical novels? Did it include parts and bits of what I edited? So there's these like 1 or 2 ghost manuscripts that probably have, never been found. Nowadays, famous writers will like keep their papers and sell them, but at that time, it wasn't so done. And so really these are boxes of things that were stored, in the apartments in the Bowery, and then when she moved to Aspen, where her daughters ended up, and her daughter Joelis got them placed at the Beinecke in, I think, 1972, 73. Yeah. Other questions? It's 8 o'clock. Thank you all so much.